Welcome to Command and Control, a podcast series about military command and the control measures used to orchestrate combat engagements and wars. I've been thinking about this for a while and I've developed a little theory. My hypothesis is that command is human and control has become increasingly technical or technological. There are libraries filled with discussion and commentary about command, but very little about control. And given the growth in C2 systems in HQs, I think we need to consider how we effectively synchronize between the key functions of command and control. We haven't had a serious debate about what the control element is since the 1980s. I'm Peter Roberts, your host, as we talk to people, operators, commanders, technical geniuses, academics, and those from industry who've been thinking about different aspects of C2 for a while. The show is sponsored by Systematic.
Systematic are the creators of Citaware, the world's #1 C4 ISR software. We've designed C2 systems for the military since 1986 and supply more than 45 countries worldwide. With a heritage built on innovative development and rigorous testing, this is a proven in-service solution based on real customer requirement and tailored to fit your needs.
Artificial intelligence in command and control, right? Everyone seems to be talking about it. The claims about what it could do are incredible. From defense fiction writers to political and military leaders, the future will apparently be defined by who can exploit AI and C2 the best. But most of those same people couldn't define AI, or C2 for that matter, if you asked them. Even to a pragmatist like me, it's clear that we really need to understand AI, ML, and what part it will play in command and control. No generic statements here about sprinkling artificial intelligence on everything, but some reality instead from people who work with and develop AI for command and control. So I grabbed a couple of AI engineers, former military guys, who could explain to me what the significance of this would be and when we'd be seeing it in ops rooms. Henrik Roberdam is a former Danish Air Force officer with nearly 30 years' experience on operations, rising from a conscript to a senior officer. And today, he's responsible for Air C2 at a European tech company that deals specifically with AI in command and control. Erik Sommer is another AI C2 guru. His background is in the Danish military and on military operations. This Henrik served in Syria, Kosovo, Iraq and Afghanistan on operations and within multinational organizations, French, British and American, as well as in NATO, where he was working on the S&T program focused on autonomy, AI, robotics, big data and innovation. Now, both these guys today run teams who deal with artificial intelligence, the reality of it, as well as the ambition of today's political and military leaders. And they deal with it on a daily basis. They live hand in glove with a team of AI engineers on a daily basis. I haven't come across two people who are more in tune with exactly what's happening at the cutting edge of AI in command and control for the military as these two. Having been joined by two such eminent scientists, maybe I shouldn't call them scientists, maybe I should call them engineers, scientific engineers. But listen, I've had a pre-conversation with these two guys and genuinely I found it hugely enlightening and I think you'll enjoy their pragmatic take on what it is. But the most important thing we need to do when we're talking about this new technology is do some definitions. So listen, the first thing I want to get you both with is, what is AI? In your world, what is it? So the Russian view is that there's an element of it which is related to autonomy, and the other element of it, because the Russians think there are only two, is related to this idea of a sentient capability, something able to think and decide for itself and learn and grow. And I guess if you look at science fiction, this is what people think about. They think about HAL from 2001. They think about all the other computers, the Terminator, whatever it is. A machine that has the ability to act autonomously and a degree of intelligent thinking, right? The ability to do it on its own, to act without human inputs. There are a multitude of other ways that people describe AI. How would you talk about it?
Well, actually, it's a combination of computer science, huge data sets that in combination leads to solutions for some problems. This is actually the simple way of defining AI. The thing is that everything is called AI right now. Every time you talk about things that actually is more machine learning or more hard-coded problem solving. People tend to call it AI. But I think the main difference is that real AI is actually able to learn by itself. You see that with the chatbots that's coming forward now, that they actually are autonomous in the way that they are training themselves based on a huge amount of data sets. So that's actually where I see AI developing towards a self-learning machine, but you still need to provide the data.
So what's the difference between that and machine learning?
Machine learning is a more logical sense of doing it. As I said, it's kind of hard coding. You set up some logarithm or algorithms that measures on a certain set of data and actually comes to the same solution every time the data actually looks alike. So the machine learning, in contrary to AI, that is learning by itself, actually, is kind of more self-sustaining in my world.
Yeah, if I may jump in, there's probably a technical definition of AI and machine learning. But Peter, as you said, I'm a practitioner with a long military background. I would rather say it's a tool that maybe is not very clever, but it can learn and can help you with the dark, dirty, and dangerous jobs. So you don't have to spend time or take a risk, but it's some kind of tool that will help you, and it can do more than just add two and two. And when you learn it, it's five, then eventually it will say five. But the practitioner way, I think that's what are really interesting for us. And then the algorithm guys, they can discuss what is an AI algorithm, what is an ML. But I think focusing on the practical use of intelligence, I think that's probably the key word is intelligence. And what is intelligence is both that you know something, you can find it, but then you can take two informations and create a third information by adding the two informations. So I think that's my definition, more the practitioner way.
I sort of like that, is that the system, can put pieces together and then formulate a conclusion from that. And I guess that's the difference between, if we think about AI in this sense, that's the way it's different from ML, right? So machine learning doesn't do that, but AI, as we're interpreting it now, does do that. But it's coming to a conclusion based on what? A set of codes or algorithms that are put in the first place, and then it sort of learns from those, right?
Right, but the other thing that comes into my mind now is that you actually put kind of a connection between autonomous system and AI. And I don't think that's right. AI does not automatically means that the thing is going autonomous. I think that AI will, at least in my time, be a decision support system. And a lot of things actually goes in that way. Do you want the machine to take decisions for you? Well, that will be fine if you're talking about a close-in weapon system that has very short time to react, for instance, on board ships. But if you're talking about, as Henrik mentioned, the kind of involvement of conclusions based on a huge amount of data, it becomes more and more a kind of decision support system where the AI actually helps you sort out and analyze all the data you have available about a subject, an area, or in a time frame. So I think a lot of skepticism around AI is because people think that AI equals autonomous systems, and that's not necessarily the case as far as I see it.
It's like the Russian view is very much those two things are joined. I don't know whether military leaders and political leaders feel that, because they talk about sprinkling a bit of AI on everything and it'll make everything better. I think it's quite nice to have a sort of better understanding from you guys about what it is, and if the focus really is going to be in C2 and decision support over the next decade, because we're quite a long way away from doing this stuff that techno-fiction writers have of killer robots and lobsters that are able to think for themselves and climb up Mars and do clever stuff, right? I mean, that is some time away, right?
In many ways it is. And then again, it is not. Because the speed you see AI develop in right now is going to increase. And again, going back to the chatbots that we have seen launched on different platforms, it's going so fast. And I think it's very hard to comprehend right now that the speed of development in AI and within computer science is going to increase exponentially over time. And so where are we ending? And recently you have seen the debate on, are we going to put a hold on development of AI, seen from a political point of view? But going back to the military purpose, I think there's still a lot of things to develop within the framework of AI before you actually end up with some product that can actually support your decision making in a relevant way. Everyone talks about AI as a problem solver for just about everything, from picking up strawberries to make major decisions in combat. But it is still a thing that needs to evolve. And basically, the military is quite conservative in the way of thinking, and it might take a while before it actually comes through and is being put to use in a broader sense, I think.
So if we're starting AI on the premise that it's got to be developed almost with a specific task in mind, then the military needs to define what it wants AI for rather than saying we just want it for everything. And that means that actually it's got to go back to the practitioner to say, hey, this is what I want AI for. Is this about pulling together target data? Is it about creating intelligence? Is it about command and control? Is it about situational awareness? Is that then the basis of that question is what the basic code is written on, where the algorithms come from. And because of that, you get a specific stylized output from AI. So it doesn't go off learning about, I don't know, the difference between rabbits and cats or whatever it is.
I agree that the military can come up with areas saying that this is where we want to utilize AI, and AI need to learn that domain. For example, when we are doing experimentation with image recognitions, it has to be trained on specific military images. We have used some of the pre-trained image recognition tools from the internet, and when we show them a tank, it says, this is a boat. And it looks at the barrel and says, that's a baseball bat. So it needs to be trained specifically on that military domain, military vocabulary. If you take natural language processing, for example, and you want to do a summary of a 10-page report, for example, taking a report from a security policy discussion, and then you translate it into a summary, and you realize that some of the special words that the military are using do have different kind of definitions. There's also what I would call a civilian definition, and when you read these summaries for the first time, it doesn't make sense. So you have to do a lot of iteration saying this word has to be translated or used in that way in the military perspective. Otherwise, it's complete nonsense, to be honest. So I do recognize there is a huge development, but I think that, as you said, it's not round the corner where you make decision just by pressing a red button and then you get all the right answers. I think there's a lot of hard work still to make it useful and usable. For example, if the chat GPT, if you ask it for something and it doesn't know the answer, it's just giving you a wrong guess. So I guess we come back to discussing trust in AI, but it's just saying that this is my answer. I try to Google myself and see what is my military career. And I was amazed so many positions I have taken that I have never been close to. And then I asked, and that's not correct. And then it gave another answer. So I think still there's a lot of way before you can trust it and before it is developed and trained sufficiently so you can ask it for, let's say, more responsible decision support. But to be honest, when it hasn't been trained, it's quite stupid. And you can take autonomous systems, and we had Henrik, he's talked about autonomy and AI, and that's not the same. And I fully agree, because if you think an anti-tank mine is basically an autonomous weapon. If a tank drives over it weighing more than 500 kilos, it will detonate itself, the mine. Is that an autonomous system? Yes, because it's programmed to do something, and when the right condition is there, it explodes. But would you say it's artificial intelligence? No, I don't think so. So again, autonomy is one thing. There will be part of the autonomy where it makes decisions. I think that is more the key of it. And of course, there'll be some AI to learn how to move that autonomous system. Just to move around on a battlefield is quite complicated and requires a lot of brain in order not to get injured. But the decision support, I think that's the most important part of it. And I think that's the potential. As you said, intelligence, I think that's a great area, because just finding the right data you want to analyze is a tedious, a very cumbersome job that takes a long time. But that's not AI, that's more big data. But I think big data and AI is somehow connected, that you're able to find the information that will inform a human being taking decision. So finding the data is important. And then the next step is that you put together the data and start saying, okay, now I got 10,000 data, and putting that together, I will give you 4 advices. That could be AI as I see it.
So I'm fascinated by this because we keep coming back, both of you kept coming back to this fact that it relies on really good data. And if there's one thing militaries are terrible at, it's keeping good, clean databases, because it is dull, right? And no one wants to sit in front of a spreadsheet or go through pictures or whatever it is. There's a degree to which we just don't enjoy that as military organizations. The data, though, is absolutely fundamental, right? It's as important as the clever algorithms and codes that you guys write. It is the fundamental part that underpins the right or wrong answer at the end of the day, correct?
Here we go. Yeah, absolutely correct. It all boils down to the data. And the thing is that when we're talking about the new buzzword multi-domain operations, or joined all domain operations, or JET-C2, and joined all domain command control, the amount of data available is so huge that I think it's more or less outside the human capability to sort out all these data and find the relevant ones. And that's where you can start to use AI to actually find the relevant data. But as you say, Peter, you need to gather those data. You need to collect them. You need to store them. You may need to label them, make them accessible in order for the AI to actually do something about it. And that's a huge task that I don't think anyone has a complete overview what that actually encompasses, to just make sense of all the data you have available. And when you look at, again, the way it has developed, we talk about sensor to shooter or sensor to decision maker to shooter. Well, that's just one string. But if you look into the military complex, a major operation, there is maybe thousands of those strings. How do you actually manage to get the right data to the right guy? How do you actually manage to collect the data you need in order to train your AI to do the right thing? So it all boils down to the data collection, the data logistics, so to speak. How do we deal with that? And the good thing about computers is that if you put rubbish into a computer, you can get rubbish out of it. And there's no way around that. So you need to have your data sets sorted out and being useful to train the AI to the function you actually need it to work within. I think that otherwise, as Henrik says, it's not a red button. Oh, we got AI, I press a button, I get my plan. No, it doesn't work that way.
And that's the other part. So once you've got the good data sets, which God only knows is going to take us a while to do, right? And once we've got the good data sets, then you've got the good algorithms and code, and that is producing good stuff. That's only part of the answer, isn't it? Because you're giving it data, but you almost need to give it some sort of knowledge and guidelines and boundaries and rules to behave with in order to come up with things that help a commander make it. And here we're specifically talking about command and control tools. So in order to do that, do you have to educate your chosen AI system in, I don't know, the principles of war? Or do you have to have it read Clausewitz? Or how do you educate this stuff? I don't know. Do you take it back to Herodotus? Does it suddenly get loose on the internet and interpret all battles since the start of, I don't know, 5,000 years BC? How do you go about this stuff of creating a C2 system if you had the good data sets and the code to start? How do you even start conceptualizing that?
Well, I think that's a great question, because working in an IT company, everything has to be 0 and 1s. And sometimes we say, you know what? We're talking about military art. And art, can you put that into an algorithm? I think that's a very complicated question. And to be honest, I think there are some quite simple tasks where you don't need any very advanced AI to help you. Because when you go into the military domain, if you go on a battlefield, there's a lot of things that not when you're sitting home in your nice warm apartment and you have high bandwidth connection, internet connection that works 24/7. So I think there are some practical things that you need to take into account. So I don't think the military should aim for the most advanced AI algorithms to help them. I think there are some simple tasks where simple AI can help you. And just getting access to the data, you said when you have access to all the data, let's take that assumption. But that might happen in a peacetime headquarters, in a permanent headquarters, static headquarters. But what if you are at a divisional staff and you have to move? I think the recent events have shown that you can be hit everywhere on the battlefield, and particularly headquarters are a nice target where you can take out all the head of a division if you hit that headquarters with the current way of thinking. So you have to disperse, you have to rely on radio communication, and then the bandwidth challenge is coming in. And also the computer power, because that server needs to be on board an armored vehicle, and there's a lot of vibration and all that kind of stuff. So I think we should more aim as a starter or as a first objective with AI to get a simple algorithm to help with simple tasks. And then we can go for the more advanced stuff later on. And because I think the civilian society, they will probably develop algorithms that the military can utilize. Since the 1960s, the research and development costs have changed from the military budgets to the civilian budget. So all the cell phone, etc. So the military is capitalizing on what the civilian world is developing. And I think you probably will identify some civilian algorithm that can be utilized in a military way. So as we started saying, should the military say we need AI to support us in that area? Maybe we should also look the other way around to look at the civilian society and says, there's an algorithm, there's some AI that is really useful and it's working in practice. We have more or less the same challenge in the military world. Why don't we take that algorithm and just paint it green if it's the Army or light blue if it's the Air Force, and then utilize it this way? So there are some constraints. So I think we should aim for the achievable, and then for the vision, we might have a vision, but again, it's better see it works than talks about it. Of course, there are some scientists that are developing the latest development, but again, is it useful? ChatGPT, is that useful in the military world? In some areas, yes. In others, I don't think so.
Henrik, I can almost see you wanting to jump in here.
Yeah, I think we are looking very much on the systems, but there's this triangle between doctrine, systems, and organization that we need to take into account here. Because one thing is to look at the systems and say, oh, AI will help us do this, do that, and can support our decision making. But again, you have to go back to the basics and say, okay, but then we need to change our doctrine. We need to change the way we are working. We need to change the way we take decisions, the way we distribute our decisions. How do the system help us in actually developing our doctrine and actually putting it into action? And combined with that, you need to organize. And again, as Henrik says, if you're going to bring huge computer powers out to the front line or just behind the front line, what about power? What about technicians? What about this and what about that? There's a huge amount of practical problems that all of a sudden arises that you never, as a soldier, had to deal with before. And all of a sudden, you're sitting there as a company commander and an IT expert at the same time. And how do you deal with that? How do you train your people? How do you actually get them to understand what's going on in the system they are using? So this is not just about an application of AI into the military world. It entails so many different other settings in the way we do military operations that you cannot see it in a kind of isolated way. And I think that the militaries around the world is beginning to understand that slowly.
I'm smiling to myself as you say that, because in my head I have two factors. One, some military requirements officer being told by his general to go away and write this huge requirement about what he wants this super piece of AI to do. And then on the other hand, 40 years later, out rolls 400 Arctic lorries with generators and servers on board to service a small brigade headquarters. And this stuff arrives as sort of, the answer to all your problems. Here you go, General, this is your answer. And of course, the electronic footprint on a battlefield for that is enormous, as well as the space, right? It's funny the way that we talk a little bit about how militaries need to procure systems like this, and actually going to a specialist provider and pulling out what's available, using it, and then informing the development of it more in a spiral way just seems a more natural way to take on something like this. One of the biggest problems, though, for me, is not just about the procurement and the doctrine, but there's a culture here and a trust element, right? Which is just really different from anything we've seen before. We trust a car to brake when it does it. We trust our Apple Maps or whatever it is to give us navigation to where we're going. But when we trust machines to start giving us intelligence, to giving us courses of action, there's a really big issue in there, which actually I'm not sure we're ready for.
No, I agree with you. And I don't think you cannot leave the human brain out of the loop. As you said, take the GPS. It will tell you where to go, and it will actually lead you in the opposite direction on the highway if you're not awake, right? You still need to look out the front window, the windscreen, and see the sign saying, oh, you're not allowed to go in here, even though the GPS tells you to do so. So the human imagination, in my mind, can never be replaced by AI. But there are a lot of stuff that sounds a little arrogant, but it's monkey see, monkey do work. It's a lot of tedious work that you're going to do. You mentioned all the spreadsheets before, putting things into spreadsheets and all this stuff that you need to do in order to gather data as it is today. There you can actually get the help from AI and the computer systems to help you do that and make this kind of overview of what data do I have available. But in my mind, data is useless until they are changed into information that you can use to take your decisions. And this change from raw data into information is also some of the places where you can say, oh, we can use AI here. And you need to do it again and again and again and again. As Henrik said before, the first maybe 80 times you get the answer from the computer, it might be rubbish, but it will learn over time and help you. And you can help it learn by correcting it and train it. And again, going back to the data and the change into information, that requires quite a huge change in the mindset of the military way of thinking. I think everyone talks about going into this data-centric way of warfare, but I don't think they have thought it all the way through that how many changes this actually encompass going into a data-centric way. And how do you cope with that? Well, time will show us eventually, and it might get into use faster than I imagined because I'm an old bugger. But it's still work in progress, and it will take some time. Going back to the acquisition process you just mentioned, if you're going to buy software the way you buy hardware, you lose. Because when you have written the 500 pages of requirements, this software has developed past that point. So when you get this huge system rolled out, it's obsolete after 5 years. So you absolutely need to approach the software acquisition in a different way than buying hardware. And that's also a hard exercise for the traditional military way of doing things.
Yeah, I think I would like to talk about the trust. I think the best way to get trust is to experiment. You can talk a lot and try to convince people that this is great, but they will never trust it until they actually experience by themselves. So do experimentation, doing quick spirals. I think that will also increase the trust in what you're working with, trust in this technology. I have a good example. I bought a new car and there was an adaptive cruise control. So it keeps the distance automatically to the vehicle in front of me, and if it brakes, my car brakes. In the beginning, I had a funny feeling, says, no, I have to be vigilant all the time. And after a couple of weeks, I got used to it. And then suddenly I had a rental car and there was no adaptive cruise control. And suddenly I got a bit scared because I said, am I able to brake quick enough if the vehicle in front of me is braking? Because now I don't have this machine that is helping me. I think that was a great example for myself to see that if you start using it, your trust will build if it delivers what you expect. And I think that's the only way to get that trust into AI. Do experiments and do quick experiments. And therefore, I think the best way to identify where does AI give the most benefit within the military domain, make a lot of experimentations. Quick experimentation, does it work? Yes or no? And that will also have an effect on the doctrine, the organization. You realize saying, hey, I don't need these two guys anymore. They can be utilized elsewhere in the organization because now this new technology is actually helping me because I get the information, the data I want actually quicker than before when I had two guys finding the information for me.
So one of the things I want to get to, just which you both sort of hinted at, is this idea of creativity and the human element, where we get AI developing, and it is developing and it's running on, and we're getting it into potentially offering both intelligence, refined information, and potentially we're talking about the ability to offer courses of action at some stage in the future. But the issue for me is creativity. And I had an argument with this with another, there's another defense firm out there, and their evangelist was saying, so AI can do creativity. So we've seen it paint pictures and we've seen it create albums, and it can do pictures where you can't recognize the difference. All these things are possible. Don't doubt it. AI will promise all things to all men. And I sort of worried about that a lot because everything I've seen about AI is that it can't do creativity, particularly in a military way. Everyone seems to revert to the classic case of the Go game, where the human masters were beaten by a strategy that was unforeseen. And from that, people have extrapolated that AI will end humans running military conflict because AI will do it better. As two people really experienced in this stuff that I actually trust the views of, what's your view on the human element of creativity and how it stacks up against the future of AI?
Well, that's a good question. I think that AI will never replace the human creativity, the way of seeing things from a completely different angle and actually act upon it. I think, I've read about this Go game. Come on, it's a game with quite a few parameters. Even for a Go game, it's a few parameters, whereas a battle, it's not set parameters. You have an adversary, you have yourself, you have your allies, and everything is put together. The amount of variables you see there, I think, AI might be able to sort it out, but to make the hook like Schwarzkopf did in the first Gulf War, actually saying, okay, we are not going to do what the enemy expects us to do. We'll do something completely different. This inspiration, well, I may be naive, but I don't see that coming in a computer version right away. It might end up, again, I don't think in my lifetime, though. And again, it could be logical seen from your point of view, but if your adversary does something completely different than you expect him to do, then what? Then you have to react on it. And maybe in kind of a short-term situations, the AI, going back to the closed embedded system, if you got parameters that lies within a certain framework, AI can take the decision for you and actually start to do something about the problem. But if you're taking it in a longer term, and actually the time frame expands not only to troops in contact, but actually into a complete battle over days, I think this human creativity is necessary in order to win. I don't think yet that the computer science will kind of encompass this creativity that you need to actually win the battle. Again, I might be naive in that sense, especially if you talk to computer scientists, because they can make computers do everything. But I'm a little skeptical here.
Henrik, do you agree?
Yes, I do, because when you said, well, a computer can win any games, yeah, but I can tell you, I can beat every computer in every game. And you know why? Because when I'm starting to losing, I'll just change the rules. And the machine is following rules, although they are quite complicated in some of the games, but it plays according to rules. And if I'm going to lose a war, I change the rules, because in war there are no rules. And if you are losing, you just do something differently that your opponent do not expect. So if I'm playing against a chess computer, I'll just change the rules. Every time I do a draw, I remove his queen, and he says, you're not allowed to do it. Yes, I am, because I just changed the rules. So I think that's the major change between games and real world armed conflict. In games, there are, although quite complicated, a set of rules. In war, there are some principles, but you can change these principles too. So that's why the computers will never take over armed warfare, because the human is still better. The human will lose to any computer if you have to do logic, if you have to do math, because they are much quicker. But then you just change the way the math works. And I think that's the key way you have to look at it, that artificial intelligence, at this stage, we see it now, will never take over armed warfare. If you look at what happens, for example, in Ukraine, everybody would have said that will be a warfare of the 21st century. But what we're seeing is trench warfare, sometimes much like World War I. So again, why is this happening? Why are the cyber warfare is not taking over? Why do they do kinetic warfare, shooting at each other using artillery, tanks? Because that's outdated. No, it's not. You just have to use them the right way. And therefore, the cyberspace will never completely take over. As a British divisional commander says, I can't cyber a division across a river. So there are some, let's say, old-fashioned way of thinking, but you have to be open-minded for a new technology. So that's a balance. And everybody talks about Sun Tzu, who was a Chinese general 2,000 years ago. And his thinking does still apply, although the technology is differently. But still there's some, let's say, human element that I don't think a machine, I don't think AI will ever take over. But I might be surprised.
Gentlemen, listen, we've run out of time. That was a tour de force. Thank you very much. And I'm left with this feeling of much more reassurance that when we're thinking about command and control, we have pragmatists like the pair of you who are not running away down the path of this is going to solve everything. Don't just sprinkle AI on it and it'll solve all your problems. To people who've been working in this field for decades, this feels like a much more mature approach than you're getting from others who are just promising too much, I think, the same way that people promised too much from cyber when it originally came out. Gents, thanks so much for your time. Listen, I am going to come back to you in about 5 years' time. I'm going to go through this conversation together and say, oh yeah, no, we were completely right, I hope. And I don't envisage that we see sort of HAL appearing on the battlefield and changing things remarkably. Thank you both so much for your time. And as I say, we'll catch up later.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much.
The show has been sponsored by Systematic.
Systematic. Join your partners and allies already using our cutting-edge C4 ISR sit-aware suite.
We hope you enjoyed the show. As well as telling your friends and colleagues about it, please do subscribe, leave us a review on any of the usual podcast streaming platforms. This really helps us to reach new audiences and spread the word. We're going to be recording a live show at DSEI in London on Tuesday, the 12th of September. I think it's about midday. We'll update that for you on social media and the next episodes as they come out. Do come along and see us and join us and pose questions and meet people. Come along to the Systematic stand and meet some of the team who are responsible for producing the show and talking on it, as well as some of the guests. But also you can send us your questions in advance. You can send them on LinkedIn or on Twitter. You can send them by email to me. Just reach out and send your stuff through. We've had a whole host of stuff coming through already. I think that episode's really going to tax the guests that we've got coming up. The episode is produced by Aurelius Lab as a show for the Wavell Room, the home of intellectual curiosity and challenging thinking for military professionals everywhere. Thanks for listening.